Give me just a second. All right, I'm all set. All right. Roger, okay, Roger just sent us, I think, link to the same video that Pegar was talking about. All right, welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today is a special day. Today is Monday, but we're going to be talking about Jordan Peterson. Because of the presidential debate, I wanted to make sure that we do this on Monday instead of Thursday. And today is one of my favorite topics, Carl Jung. And leading it off is Claire. Claire, take it away.
Thank you, Shrikant. This is going to be a fun one today. We are going to talk about Carl Jung, who is really just one of the basis of a lot of Petersonian thought. He is dripping throughout all of Peterson's books. And he's kind of one of the lesser knowns. He was a student of Freud's. He's, certainly does not get all the talk that Freud does, but he's really a deep element of Peterson's. So when we talk about Jung, Peterson is going to try to set a sort of a mythological basis for archetypes. And archetypes take on that kind of basic definition that you might know, but in Jungian terms, archetypes are defined as universal archaic symbols and images that derive from collective unconscious. And in this way, there's sort of this psychic counterpart to instincts. They're this sort of innate but quite specific knowledge that are derived from what you could consider sort of the sum total of human experiences, or the meta narrative that derives over human experiences and conscious behavior. So there's one really important element of archetypes, and really I just think Jungian philosophy in general, and certainly Jordan Peterson, is that they seek actualization. They teach you how to act within the context of the individual's environment, the individual's journey, and that sort of determines the degree of individualization. So to that end, as we go through this sort of fun story today, I really want to encourage you all to listen to this story, think about these archetypes. It's a simple one that we all know. Think about it not in terms potentially of accuracy or metaphor or other philosophers that might relate in this space, but think of it more in relation to your own life and these characters and these facial expressions, and where have you seen these? Where have you seen these in others? And what can we kind of glean and learn from this? So I think in this way, this story, it's not meant to be true in the case of the capital T. It's meant to be true in that it is a meta sum of all human experiences. And in that way, let's sort of stumble together in truth toward that. So with that, let us begin the story of The Lion King. So The Lion King, Peterson starts, is the highest grossing animated movie ever until Frozen, which he makes like a little sly about because apparently he really hates Frozen. And I think one of the reasons of this is that The Lion King is certainly filled with unconscious archetypes and metaphors, but it's also, he points out, really consciously influenced by archetypes as well. Things like kings, The Lion King, this story, and a lot of these creatures are also sort of the conscious representation of a lot of these feelings. So when we think about that title, The Lion King, okay, well, what is a lion king? What is a lion? Well, certainly it's an apex predator. It's golden like the sun. There's a lot of light throughout here that we're going to come back to that metaphor. It's physically powerful. It's strong. It can defeat others. And in this way, it's not self-evident, but it's logical to us. We think of lions in that way, in the same way we sort of think of snails as being small. It couldn't be the snail king. That would just be illogical to us, and it would need to have some other story. But this Lion King motif, like so many of the other archetypes in the story, are really natural.
Claire, can I make a comment?
Please.
Okay. So folks, what we are doing is that this is a series on personality and its transformations. And what we are doing today is to look at Carl Jung's take on it. And we are using Lion King, or Jordan Peterson uses Lion King as an example to illustrate how Carl Jung approaches this topic of personality and its transformations. So it is about Carl Jung with this as an example. So we're going to spend time looking at this example in detail, but then we are going to broaden the discussion to Carl Jung's approach to this, because this is an illustration of Carl Jung's approach. So those of you who have not watched the video, don't worry. If you're familiar with Carl Jung, you'll come join the discussion at that point once we have put this particular example on the table. And for those who are not familiar either with Carl Jung or this video, all of these ideas are very easily accessible. That's the power of this. Carl Jung's focus is to identify common patterns in humanity itself across cultures. And those actually speak to each individual directly. So don't worry, you will be able to actually take part in this discussion too. All right, so just wanted to establish that broader context in which we are talking now about Lion King. Take it away, Claire.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to walk through sort of the plot of the story. A lot of these elements that we know, we'll speak about the archetypes. We'll think about the symbolism, and we'll sort of derive the meaning post talk, as Shrikant is saying. So I'm going to try to share my screen and just pull up some of the images as I go through. We might abandon this method if we think that it doesn't work, but you guys can see that just one little browser. Correct? I'm going to take that as yes. Okay, great. So this is the start of the movie, the sunrise at the start. This represents to Jung sort of the dawn of consciousness, this sun element being sort of innately part of our human evolution because we evolved as day creatures. Our eyes make up, half of our brain processing. We are visual creatures. We go toward the light because those humans that went away from the campfire were eaten by that monster in the dark. So it really is a deeply sort of evolutionary concept. So we have this sun that comes up in the beginning of it. We see this, and this sort of represents the sun hero is being illuminated. There's also an Apollo element here too, right? The sun is coming up, it's going back down into the darkness. The sun is being kind of battling it out, and then it's rising once again. So as we come into this sort of sunrise element, and all the animals start coming out, we see the baby animals, and this certainly is a symbol of sort of rebirth. And then all these animals coming out onto Pride Rock and kind of gathering around this central pyramid. So a lot of things are happening here. First of all, there's a lot of sort of heavy, dense celebratory music, which is important in that it opens up that something profound is about to happen, right? It has that sort of chorus and collectiveness that that opening song is so sort of moving. So we come here to Pride Rock, and what does this rock symbolize? Well, first of all, it's in the middle of order, right? It's in the middle of the kingdom. It takes this prominent spot looking over. It represents tradition. It represents everything that is sort of the Egyptian pyramids. It's the center, the peak of the dominance hierarchy. It again is in the light. The light is shining in this area. It's in the middle of the territory. And so all these animals, they come to sort of observe this rock. They come to the central core nucleus of what is order. And they come to sort of see how it works. And in this way, they are sort of paying homage to or observing everything that is culture, order, the opposite of chaos, sort of recurrence, and they're bowing down to that. You also have flying around here, Zazu. So we'll talk about all of these characters, but Zazu's really symbolism here is to be the king's eye, right? He is Horus. He flies above the dominance hierarchy, and there's an image of the eye here, right? He's the eye of the king. And so often we'll see that concept of a pyramid, and what's at the top of it is the eye. That's on all US currency. It's a deeply Egyptian concept. And so the meaning here is that there's something on top of the king, right? That there is this eternal logos which supersedes everything that is cultural hierarchies and sort of the repetition of culture. And the I is everything. It's what sees across all hierarchies, right? To sort of be that sort of one meta image. Again, calling back to the I being this visual, this innately human, a symbol of consciousness. So with Peterson, it's all about what you're paying attention to, what you're looking at, what you're focusing on. So these animals are all gathering. The animals, Peterson says, really represent sort of the classic id, as opposed to ego. They are animal quite naturally, and this is where it's a literal, it's a conscious metaphor, but they're sort of sexually aggressive. They're making noises. They need to be sort of integrated into the culture that is social being. And that's the process that we all as humans have to go through to sort of take those youthful impulses of sex and food and sort of those natural, more innate animal instincts and organize them into a society that allows us to function, allows the rest of society to function. And that's that sort of classic coming of age. So the animals are kind of played out here to represent that id juxtaposition with the king itself. So who do we have standing on top here? We can't see him, but we'll zoom in, is Mufasa. First of all, first thing you notice about him, I want to see, let's see if we can get in. Let's see if we can get a close shot here. No. Yes, there he is. Is this lobster posture, right? So he's looking up, and there's a hierarchical element here, that once an individual integrates the shadow, you can sort of see it on their face, right? They wear that integration on them. This is what Peterson would also say, that like someone who says no is someone that proves that they can say no, right? This is someone who isn't just naive and youthful, but really stands strong. And of course, Mufasa is the king, the benevolent king. He's really that lion king figure. Who else do we have here? We're gonna go over to Rafiki. So Rafiki symbolizing the shaman. So he's this baboon creature. The shaman, sort of the tie to the mystical, and Peterson says it signifies sort of that which is not real yet.
So Casey, where did you buy it from?
Sorry, if everyone could just mute. That which is not real yet, that is what has not been brought into consciousness. He's the ancient wisdom, right? And so this relationship that we have between the benevolent king and the ancient wisdom is an archetype in itself also, right? That he's the spirit tree of repository, and the king is sort of the manner in which that wisdom is acted out in the world. So they both need to have that relationship and interact with each other. To be a good ruler, you sort of have to, as Peterson would say, rescue your father from the underworld and integrate them back. And so that this balance is really important. And so these two guys are friends. And who comes out of this relationship is Simba. Simba is the hero archetype, but at this stage, he's a different variation of that archetype. He's the vulnerable hero. He's the newly born. And it's really important in this image, as a lot of the facial expressions throughout this movie and the animators he calls back to are just so talented, is that this looks really, really cute. Right. And there's something to this image that is just men and women alike, like this thing is freaking adorable. And that is archetypal in itself. Right. He is the light. He is the potential. The animals, crawl toward him. And it sparks that reaction to you that we immediately see a baby of any kind. And there's sort of this awe response, right? Because that potential, that the potential of the hero is moving to us as humans. And so we see that in the baby here. The shaman then baptizes him. So he has this red on his forehead, and Rafiki he breaks this ripe fruit. That's symbolic in itself. Also the ripe fruit being the fruit that's been out in the sun too long, or it holds the sun, it holds the potential of light. And in this way, Simba is sort of baptized into the light, right? And that is kind of spewed all of him. There's a relationship here too with the shaman and the young boy, right? And this sort of the wise man needing to come back and also be that cultural element to both Mufasa and the young boy in this sort of coming of age element. So what happens then? So we baptize, we put some ripe fruit on Simba's head, and there's this iconic image. We're lifting Simba up on the top of Pride Rock, and what does the crowd do but have this sort of spontaneous bow? And I think this is an element in the film, for those of you who have seen it, where you kind of get goosebumps, right? Or there's something profound going on there. The animals all spontaneously kneel. So I want to pause on this because that spontaneity, I think, speaks to this sort of, Peterson would say, like, crowds often do act spontaneously, and it's because we're all having a shared human experience. His classic example here is the gymnast, or an ice skater, let's say, figure skater, where you're with a crowd, you're in a crowded stadium, and everyone is watching someone perform. Someone goes out and they do it just like perfectly. You stick every landing, everything is precise, it's beautiful, it's perfection. What does the next ice skater do? Like, how do you top that? How do you top perfect? And the way you do it, and we've all been in the experience of watching it, is to watch that person who sets perfect at their bar. And so they need to push themselves so far that they are just teetering on the edge of chaos and total failure in a way that is so stimulating that, the stadium is on the edge of their seat, because you can't take your eyes off of it. And they stick the last landing, they don't fall, and the crowd, spontaneously gets to their feet. And so I think that this is a similar element there. Spontaneous applause, right? Like, sometimes there is just this Peterson calls it a synchronicity, something that it is an element of Jungian thought that gets a little bit of flack, with this idea that there are synchronous events they're hard to communicate. They're kind of unconsciously felt, but they're profound, and they again relate to these archetypes. Okay, so then we've had our good king to the evil king, the tyrant. So Scar is Mufasa, our great king, Lion King's evil brother. This is the classic Cain and Abel story. These are yin and yang, right? This is two sides of the coin. So the king always has an evil brother. And it's important that he's there to make the king's status what it is. So the state in a similar way, or culture in a similar way, always has a tyrannical element. There's always the side of it that gets pushed too far. And in this way, the state always sort of deteriorates on its own accord. The present is always being sort of uphinged by the potential for tyranny. And in this way, culture, no matter how good it is, it's always sort of two steps behind the current environment. And that's where, kings and leaders and anyone needs to be looking ahead. But culture can't keep up as quickly as humans evolve through our generations and through stories like this. Let's see, something about a flood. I don't even know what that is really in relation to. So Scar, just as an image, he is literally scarred, right? So he has this large kind of scar on his face. He has this sort of slinky look to him where he's just totally slouched, nihilistic about life, given up. He has this kind of slimy voice that feels sort of very distrustful. He's the sort of evil adversary of the state. He's also kind of paradise lost and paradise found, right? And so there's an element to him that is sort of a comedic part of the movie. He seems like smartly rational and witty and kind of slimy. And in this way, in that sort of Paradise Lost story, or the story of Lucifer, there is this rationality that seems to sort of fall in love with its own productions or its own potential. And in that way, rationality has its own tyrannical elements, just like any sort of society. So he's resentful, he's skulking. And I think in this image, you also see, like, even color wise, Mufasa is golden like the sun, right? He's full of light, versus this sort of like dark and black and Satan-like colors here. So in an early stage here, Mufasa takes Simba up to Pride Rock. This is that classic line of, like, everything that the light touches is yours. This is really important in that, again, the light touches, that's order, right? That's everything that's in our camp that the light is seen. Everything outside of it is chaos. That's the elephant graveyard. We've kind of alluded to this before. And it's important, you know, everything the light touches is yours is important. And I think we all experience it in what we see in our given life. So let's say you move to a new apartment, it takes some time to nest, or you move to a new neighborhood. It takes some time to really explore every corner, to really clean every part of your home before you do start to sort of nest in it and see it. And so that's really innately part of our you know, what we see as humans. We need to look at it first. And he says, okay, the light touches is yours, but everything in the dark there, you have to stay away from. That's the elephant graveyard. Just don't go there. He doesn't really explain a lot about why, which we talked about before is like a great way to make an adolescent go do exactly what you told them not to do. But your typical hero has to be a rule breaker a little bit, right? Otherwise they can't get themselves into trouble, and they can't get out of trouble. So in contrast to his father kind of showing him about everything that is the light, everything that is culture, Simba, as he's kind of growing up, is also getting to know his evil uncle a little bit. And this dynamic is quite contrasted in that Scar kind of seems to get tired easily of Simba. He's always kind of trying to quiet him down. And this is symbolic of kind of life, the tyrannical elements of life eventually crushing you, right? Eventually the kind of spirit of discipline crushes that youthful spirit. And yes, it's the price we pay for sort of an orderly society in which people can move up, but it is a price to pay in itself. And Scar kind of pretends to be on his side, but is tricking him. And certainly we know just from the visuals of just these facial expressions that Scar is not in it for anything good. So at this time of his youth, Simba also meets Nala, who's very important at this part of the story, but really also a key element of Simba's transformation. So Nala represents in Jungian terms the enema. So the animus and animus are enema and animus are two contrasted sort of easiest way to think of it is masculine and feminine. And so in this way, and you can even see it with this sly little look here, right? So Nala is, she teases Simba. She teaches this sort of exploratory humor, exploratory hero to, you know, where his guardrails are. She, you know, tells him not to get to, you know, he's the son of the king, but she's the one who can kind of face, you know, make him face the reality. And in this way, that enema concept represents the spirit of sort of sexual selection and everything that is that feminine kind of facing your consciousness and kind of seeing who you are. So they are going out and sort of playing. Several times in the movie, Nala sort of pins him down, which calls to all that of, you know, getting knocked down and really facing your own consciousness, and he can't kind of stand up and face it. She humbles him in a way that no one else sort of can. So they're playing around, they're singing all sorts of songs, and where do they end up? Of course, but the elephant graveyard, right where they were told not to go. And so here we have our first orientation into the opposite, the place the light doesn't touch. And so this is the kingdom of Hades. This is death. It's filled with hyenas, which are really well-chosen animals because hyenas have very strong jaws. They can crush skulls. They can crush human skulls. They're sort of a natural enemy of lions. So not one hyena can often kill a lion, but they can group up and they certainly do take down, especially less high in the hierarchy lions. They also just sort of look horrible, right? That there's a lot of these species, snakes, vultures, hyenas, where there's something to humans where we know that is not a nice thing. That is not something that we want to play around with. And they also laugh maniacally. That's not particularly comforting also. There's one of them too that's sort of crazy looking, has crazy eyes, which calls to potentially schizophrenia or just a distrust and not being able to kind of put your eyes forward, focus on something. And so in this way, this becomes really a stark juxtaposition. Let's see if we can get one with the hell to hell, right? We have the red here, we have the fiery depths, and these hyenas are kind of, calling Simba and Nala into the depths of potential hell. So I think that's going to move us to our next fun slides. Hang on one sec. All right. So these two stupidly sort of went out into the unknown. They are saved eventually by Zazu, who comes in and kind of tells everyone what's going on, and they're scared off, and they have to kind of walk back to their own respective dens with their tail between their legs. But Mufasa forgives Simba. They look at the night sky together. Let's see if we can get an image of that. So here they are sort of skulking back this night sky. And then Mufasa, and here's this amazing, great image of them looking up at this night sky. And in this way, the night sky sort of represents a cumulative fantasy. And in that way, when we probably throughout millennia as humans have looked up into the potential stars, there is potential for images there, right? And we have that with the astrology, but this cumulative fantasy allows Mufasa and his son to look up, to aim somewhere, to sort of wish upon a star from a Pinocchio's perspective. And we contrast that with Scar's den. So again, with sort of surrounded by fire. Let's see if we can get, where's his? So this den there's a lot of potentially Nazi imagery here, certainly a highly authoritative state, right? They're surrounded by fire. There's sort of a military element of all these hyenas all lined up in this dark den with this kind of light behind it. And there's an orderliness element to it too. Peterson calls to there's a correlation between disgust sensitivity and orderliness. And so when you see in societies that potentially have higher rates of infectious diseases, there's more strict rules, right? There's more required orderliness. There's a little more of an authoritative edge because of the need for that. So this we have very clearly, we see this, we know there's calls here to a lot of sort of dictatorial imagery and propaganda. So Scar entices Simba into a ravine. Scar, knows he's had his little speech with all his hyenas, and he knows what he's got to do, and so he entices Simba into the ravine. And we all know this sort of tragic story that he gets the wild beasts to all run down. He tries to escape. Scar is there. He goes and kind of tells Mufasa that his son is gonna die. And there he is telling Mufasa, and eventually Mufasa goes, saves his son, but is not able to save himself, and dies. And so let's see where we can get this image. And so Simba has to have this kind of key revelation, first of all, that just his father has died, and that's awful. But secondly, what did he do to lead his father to this place? And so Scar, after having kind of dropped the father into the ravine to his death, convinces Simba that it was his own fault that his father had died. And this really turns the story on their edge. It's a really hard one for children to watch. First of all, just because your father is dying, but then also because of that sort of moral complexity of, did he do this to himself? And so the hero has to leave. And this is an important element of the hero story, is that they often, the hero has to be raised somewhere else. They have to in some way be alienated by a group in order to come back to it. And there's an element of the emergence of adolescence where you have to break free, break the rules, leave the culture in order to come back to it. And then also, after he's banished Simba, he also sends the hyenas after to have him killed. So what happened here that led Mufasa to his death? Well, one of the things is that the wise king wasn't paying close enough attention, right? And so as we talked about this sort of contrast between the evil tyrant and the wise king, these forces are always battling within each other. They always exist within a society. And as societies become more and more strong, they build more and more complexity. The likelihood of elements of that turning into a tyranny in some element, because the king is so far up, right? How can he really speak to the people? And so this is a natural cyclical story. So Simba is banished. He runs off, and he spends his sort of, in biblical terms, his 40 days and 40 nights in the desert. So he doesn't run away immediately and everything is fantastic. He has to go through this kind of deep period of desolation and sort of almost die in the desert. But things turn around for him when he's discovered by Timon and Pumbaa. And so Timon and Pumbaa, again, some comedic element to our story, but they really represent the transition from tradition into adolescence. And this is something we all experience when you're sort of young and you're a child and you just exist within the social structure of your home. And then you're suddenly opened up to other modes of being and personalities and transitioned into this, adolescent state. And that happens really fast. We see like this shot where, he comes in one side and when he comes out, he's like pretty much a full-fledged, at least teenage lion. So he quickly transforms. He's having a great grand old time with Timon and Pumbaa. They're having fun. They're eating grubs in the jungle. They're singing songs. And this is, everything that is sort of youthful adolescence without any need for responsibility or anything like that. And it's all fun and games. So then meanwhile, back at Pride Rock, and we get some sort of shuffling here, we have our predator really turning the society into one of desolation. So you see the Zazu gets all locked up. So the king's eye, kind of the eye of consciousness and truth, is muffled. The women lions there's no food for them. They're sort of forced out, which again calls to sort of the way the tyrannical element, or the way a society often treats their women, is a really high indicator of how that society flourishes. And so they're very much forced out. There's very little natural resources, and they've stripped all the land of the resources. Even the hyenas are getting hungry. But of course, Scar doesn't care. That's sort of what he wanted all along anyways. And again, we just pop this right back into a contrast of these three just yakking it up. And we can really even see in his face this sort of, Peterson says, looks like he just ate a pint of ice cream, right? There's just this youthful, I don't care sort of smugness about him that signifies a lack of morality rather than a real, true, meaningful happiness. So he's back, he's having fun. There's a little quick piece here where Rafiki smells some of the Lion King, so he knows that he's alive, he's out there somewhere. And that story gets back to Nala, who knows that she has to get back and kind of have Simba save the society from the underworld. So Simba they're all hanging out one time. Nala comes back, and again, she shames him, right? So Nala here represents this sort of psychological figure who both physically pins him down, but then also more importantly judges him, because the animus sort of projects an ideal onto her, and she makes him feel useless, and is kind of disgusted by his incompetence with these other adolescent gross friends. And there's a call here just to sort of typical, women moving men out of their friend groups, right? Taking them on away from these adolescent idiot guys and really, grow up and see what's going on here. She's hurt. She's saddened by it too, right? She's not just pushing him, but she's disgusted. She says no, and she leaves. And Simba really is shook by this. He sort of gets all pouty and childlike as she goes. But she does it anyways. So Simba is left kind of not knowing what to do, right? He's left in darkness. He felt happy there for a moment, but he's been suddenly shamed by everything that is the anima and sort of his potential and his own identity. And so he goes to look up to the sky once again, right? To sort of wish upon a star. Where do you bring your problems? Where do you bring your unknown? But up to sort of look up to the sky and speak to the dead. And he asks sort of, what can I do? What can I do better? He asks these truly innate kind of questions. And then what happens immediately? Rafiki shows up. And this is important in that's it's important that that's quick, because what Simba's doing is he's kind of acknowledging his failure, which is sort of step one of alcoholism, right? Or recovering from alcoholism is acknowledging that there's a problem. So he says, I don't know what to do. How can I do better? He's offering that up. And the moment that reality check has happened, it's almost already fixed, right? Like if you will it, it is being willed. And so Rafiki, in this way, the sort of deeper parts of himself responds, and you start getting the answers right away. Rafiki kind of hits him a bunch of times with a stick, and he makes all these jokes, and he kind of starts to get Simba to chase him around. And thinking back on it, I forgot that element of this story. But what Peterson's saying is happening here is he's sort of enticing this recovering adolescent to be interested and to follow their way toward consciousness. And I think that there's a pay attention element here too, right? That it's enough to keep him interested and go on his own path out of the darkness. And again, this calls to that thing of like, hey, that which you pay attention to signifies your future, or that which really becomes real. So Rafiki's hitting him, he's following him through all these sort of like underground tunnels. He gets to a watering hole where he peers into, and he sees himself. And then suddenly this reflection of himself starts to look like his father. And the line here in this reflection, it quite literally turns into an image that doesn't look like Simba anymore. We know that that's that aged figure. And Mufasa says, remember who you are. And in this way, he's telling him, remember that you are the son of the king. Stop being useless. Take on the requirements of setting society straight. Remember your history. Remember who you are. And so Rafiki leaves Simba. Simba really knows what he needs to do at this point. He needs to take on the moral responsibility. He needs to fight his dragon. And at this point, he runs back to the kingdom. So I think I'm just going to close out the story and then we'll pause because we're so close to it. So he runs back to the kingdom, and let me tell you, it is not looking good. There is no food anywhere. His mother is starving. At one point, Scar like hits his mother and like physically assaults her, and that just is sort of the final straw for Simba. And he wakes up, and there's this element of awakening. Let's see if we can get that shot. Yes, in his eyes. This is a very different Simba, right? You can even see this yellow, the light in his eyes. And at this point, we have an adult fighting his dragon. So of course that fight cannot go down without like a ton of symbolism. So they are up on this rock. The lightning, so everything that is light makes it on fire, right? So it's surrounded by fire. There's a cliff element, which is a big element of many Disney movies. What is a cliff, right? It's right there on the edge of order and chaos. They're fighting. There's some back and forth. We don't know who's really going to be winning at any given point. And then there's a moment where it looks just like it did with Mufasa almost falling off the cliff, and the tyrannical king, this evil king, has a moment of where his ego takes over, and he tells Simba that he killed his father. I killed your father. And suddenly part of this waking up for Simba is the realization that he thought he killed his father. He killed his own father, right? And so there is an integration element of coming to terms with just the malevolence of life, that there is evil, and seeing that and flooding, getting rid of the naivety that is adolescence, and seeing that there was malevolence, but also having already done the work to integrate your own participation in that is enough to power Simba forward, at which point he can take over, and the lady lions come in and backing them up, and Scar is kicked off the cliff only to fall below and be eaten alive by his own hyenas, right? By his own sort of minions. And then the rains come. And so again, this water is deeply meaningful in the flooding illusion, right? That the water is washing away everything that is the tyrannical culture, only to have that phoenix being risen from the ashes, only to create a society that flourishes. This is the restoration of the kingdom. And so Simba, in this moment, he walks up to the top of the rock to sort of take his position as the newly found king. The female lions all roar in honor of this, and that cycle of life continues. And so this restoration of the society, let's get back to that. Just to close it all out. This restoration, forget it, there they are, is the meaning here is that if the individual, if the Simba within all of us is willing to confront their own shadow, as well as those forces that will continually try to undermine the harmony of life. If the individual is willing to confront both of those things, then harmony can and will be restored, and everyone will be well. And from here, they have their own Simba, their own baby, who is held up on that rock and filled forward. And so this is, the classic hero's journey. The hero archetype comes back to recreate that story, but it's also, deeper than that. It's a fictional representation of all of our lives.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. All right, so now let's open it up to questions and comments. But before questions, what I want to do is I want to give a chance for anybody who is familiar with Jung to talk about the archetypes that they see here, their own take on archetypes, any observations about archetypes. So if you're familiar with Jung, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark and add your own comments about what you see in this story, about or any part of the story. As usual, there are few new people this time. So there are 4 rules we have. Type exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom in order to speak. Number 2, keep on topic. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, speak your mind and do so courteously. Steve, you're first. Go ahead.
Yeah, I hate when people come on meetups and say, "Oh, he got it all wrong." Okay, so I know Jordan Peterson knows a whole lot more about Jung than I do, but I think he overemphasized several points here, and maybe it was to fit the Disney thing. So the archetypes, yes, the archetypes that Claire talked about early on were right on. I just want to point out there, I'm just a guy, okay? I'm not a Jungian scholar. I'm not a Jungian analyst, but I do play one on TV. No, that's a joke. I do work with a Jungian analyst, and I have read a lot in the last 6 to 8 months. So Jung would tell you archetypes are important, but only as you interpret them, not as society or this universal interpretation. Everything that Jung talks about has to do with the individual, and what he wants the individual to do is to become whole. And to become whole, you need to understand all the parts of yourselves, including the shadow. Jung would also say when Simba and Nala went into the elephant graveyard, that was a good thing, because in order to truly understand our whole self, we need to look at those shadows. We need to accept the fact that we will die. We need to accept that there is a hell and there is evil, and we need to accept that that's all part of us. And we will not become whole until we understand that about ourselves individually. So, I see the Lion King being more about the circle of life and in reinforcing some of the messages of society about masculinity. Poor Simba didn't have a chance to be who he was.
Let's do one thing, Steve.
Okay, I'm sorry, I talked too much.
You made 2 great points about Carl Jung. So let us keep, because Lion King is not important. Jung is, because that's what we're studying. We're using this example. So I will say 2 things. I think you're right on. Okay, you're right on many things. But I want to connect what you're saying with what Jordan Peterson is doing. Carl Jung, you are absolutely right that Carl Jung holds that each individual is a hero, and you have to discover yourself. So making your unconscious conscious, facing your shadows, facing your fear is how you grow. And that is what individuation is all about. And that's what archetypes are used for. And that is the primary use of them. Absolutely right. Now, second point I want to make is to talk about the nature of stories. What stories do is that they externalize the drama that goes on internally, so you can consider it from the outside. It is easier to see the elephant graveyard than to see your own shadow. And you use the metaphor of external things like Scar, like Nala, like like the elephant graveyard, your friends, your mother, your father, all of it. The external images are a way to actually deal with the psychic issues that the things in psyche. So that is a function of stories, and that's why stories are as powerful as they are, because they're not really about the external world. They're really about the drama that plays within you. And absolutely, I think Jung would definitely agree that you have to go through not only the elephant graveyard, but you have to go outside. You have to leave your kingdom in order to come back. You would also have to go through the drought. You also have to go, and all of these are like variations of the kind of thing an individual needs to go through in their own process of individuation. So great observations. Thank you very much, Steve. Next up, let me see. Jory, I don't think that there is a interpretation of Frozen. I don't know, but anybody else has comments? Anybody who has read Jung would like to comment about the archetypes that they see or anything that they see. Claire, did you want to make a follow-up comment on this topic, what Steve said or what I said?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's what that's what these stories are trying to do. And that's why they're so deeply moving, is that as we watch them and see those characters, we relate to some element of that. And that's the lived, individualized part of this. And so I think watching it and saying, okay, does it perfectly represent Jung or not? It definitely probably doesn't. But if we could pull out those archetypes and see ourselves in them, herein lies the magic.
Right. Absolutely. So, so folks, if you guys don't have something, I'm going to keep talking because I have a lot of interesting things. We did this 13-part series with, panels of Jungian analysts talking about this. So this individuation is the core concept of Carl Jung. And one of Jordan Peterson's observations, and this is actually, is based on Jung, is that when you think of things as people, or the kinds of things that you do as people, it's a much more powerful way of considering that. So when you think of it as father, right, father is basically your guidance mechanism. So it's like even you yourself guiding yourself. That function is the father function. There is a mother function. There is the anima function. And these are kind of psychological functions. And what this does is that using this kind of externalized archetypes allow you to think about what is going on with you. What is your hero function? What is your anima? What is your eternal child? What is your father function, or the kind of guidance function? And each of them have their own role, and they are dominant at some times, and the particular things that you do can be interpreted through that. So this is a very big theme in Carl Jung as well as Jordan Peterson. Aaron, you're next.
Yeah, really awesome presentation. I don't think I've ever gone through The Lion King that fast, so thank you, Claire. I also kind of just want to I think you did mention this, Claire, but I also want to touch on this idea of the need to procreate. And I think that's a really strong guiding force in Simba's life, is that, he wants, like he fools around a lot in Timon and Pumbaa and stuff like that. But it's not until Nala comes back and revisits him and reminds him, like, you're not only king, but one day you're going to have kids. And I think if you think of teenage boys, or maybe boys in their young 20s or whatever, they're just fooling around all day long. And then the impetus and the sense of urgency comes into a young boy's life or a young man's life when they have to like start providing and making a family. And I think that also is a driving force in Simba, not just his identity as being the son of Mufasa, but this idea that he needs to return and he needs to procreate with Nala. And I think the very last image of the original Lion King is Simba's son being held out, and then the cycle continues. So I think there's also this driving force to procreate and to continue life.
Thanks, Sharon. Next up is Jory. Jory, go ahead.
So my comment is that regarding the film synopsis, when Simba went down into the valley at night and looked into the pool of water where he saw his father's reflection, it was akin or reflective of the individual's journey into the unconscious to find his or her truth. And I see that as very Jungian.
Excellent point, Jory. Claire, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And before that watering hole that he goes to, they have to sort of go through these jungly and Simba sort of ducking down into it. And of course, the shaman has to guide you to that place. So I think that when we come to his sort of consciousness, that is that first step. And I agree, it is deeply Jungian. It's going into the depths of the underworld and seeing, being faced with yourself and all the ancestors before you. I also, while I have the floor, on the procreation bit, there's this, I skipped over it, but it's funny to see this face. It just made me laugh because Peterson says just this image, and I think all the eyes and the way this is all drawn is really profound. But he says that whenever he shows this to a class, everyone laughs and smiles, like, what this look is, right? And so I think when Nala comes back, there's an element of this too, right? Of like, what could you have? And she seems so much more mature and worldly and already having done this process herself. But I did think that this was quite a mature look for a children's movie. And I think, not an element of his transformation to overlook either.
Okay, David, you're next.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to say I thought it was interesting to pick up on the Lion King, the Circle of Life, as a way to express Jungian themes, because the aspect about the Jungian things, he calls them eternal or permanent parts of the structure of consciousness. So when you're connecting to them, you're connecting to something that you feel has a substantial existence outside of you, as some kind of eternal thing that really has to be paid attention to and has a great deal of power on its own. It is a representation of some true forces that actually interact, and you're seeing yourself in a reflection of that. And the idea to see that connects you to eternal. And the Circle of Life thing, this whole story is very much a way that Simba becomes part of an eternal cycle. He becomes characterized as merely a part of the cycle, as his whole role is to be seen in that and fall away almost as an individual. So he succeeds when he's no longer just the individual. He's actually accomplished this archetype. So it's kind of cool how the temporal power of the archetype raises you to sort of outside of your individual momentary frame and puts you in a different frame.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. I think, we humans are kind of social solitary in the sense that in order, for example, to play that role in society, you have to do something inside of you. And in order to kind of fully express what you've done inside of you, there's no way of doing that except in the social context. So it's kind of comes together. It's a revolution inside and it's a revolution outside, and both, and they're connected. It's not like that you can just do this thing inside, or you can do things outside without changing what's inside. So
you're working on a bigger scale at the same time that you're doing a personal act. You're doing something else that has a symbolic power to it.
yes,
Right.
excellent point, David. Next up is Steve. Steve, you need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I guess I'm the naysayer here. Are we really successful when we become what society tells us to be? Because that's what I see happening with Simba.
So
Because,
I think.
Can I finish? Let me finish. Let's see. So Simba's being raised to be his father, but what if that isn't really who Simba is? And I think from a male point of view, the men on the call may identify with this more than women, is that we are often, and women are in their own way, but men are often called to fit that hero role. And I did that. I'm retired. I had a very successful business career in leading a large sales organization, which is one of the more macho jobs you can have. And now my challenge in analysis is finding that anima, that female side of myself that I have ignored for 67 years. So yeah, I've been very successful in society's view, but I haven't been myself.
Excellent point, Steve. So let's go ahead and address that. Claire, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think finding is one thing, and then finding and integrating is like it's a whole nother set of worms, because it's not just what anima means for someone else, right? It's okay, how are you personally integrating that yourself with your own proclivities and temperaments and history and wants? So I think in my own like reverse experience of that, needing to integrate my animus, you know consciously when to push it and when to try it out, but does it feel comfortable? Like, can you do it in this way that is uniquely your identity? I think that's the challenge, and that's the work, and hey, it's lifelong. So it's not like anyone is behind at any time. On the sort of, Simba coming back and being, doing it all over again, I think the idea here is that he has learned from the lesson of his father being blindsided by the evil tyrant enough to not make that mistake again. And so the society that he is rebuilding together with Nala will be stronger to potentially make other mistakes and certainly be open up to its own form of future tyranny, but it's not the same. It's evolved.
Okay, so that's a very interesting point. See, I think, and it's a very deep point. What happens is that you have to be an individual, and you have to figure out the right way of interfacing with the society. You don't have a choice of doing, you have to do both. If you give up your individuality in order to fit into the society, it is very destructive. And because you're kind of killing parts of yourself in order to do that. At the same time, you need, in order to be fully individual, we are social beings. You cannot be really great human being without, without interfacing with society. So you need both of them. And it is true that many people, in order to quote unquote fit into the society, will destroy their individuality. That is absolutely true. There is a very large pattern. And that's what I think midlife crisis is all about. Like, people start out with trying to pursue things which are actually not their dreams. That is, they just kind of borrow dreams from other people or society, and they just try to pursue it. And the midlife crisis happens when you actually achieve them and you realize that those were not yours. And you feel an emptiness with that. So it is, and as Jung points out, it is a tremendous feat to actually discover your own self. You have to face all kinds of things in order to do that. And it is a lifelong journey. And, Jung talked about that being the issue at the second half of your life. So absolutely, but great point. So it's going to be Laura, Pegor, Paul, Joe next. Laura, go ahead. What's your question?
No, just a response to, I think having had to sit through, I don't know how many iterations of The Lion King over time, you have to look at the very ending when he's on top of the mountain and going through that whole process. You really feel that he has emerged as unto himself into that role and is taking on a new beginning. That's all I want to say. And
Thank you, Laura.
Okay.
Next up is Pegor.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yeah, I wanted to respond as well to Mr. Steve. I don't think that society does have like a requirement to conform, but it does not have, I don't think societies require people to conform to the hero mythology, to the hero archetype. So I don't think societies ask people, or at least men, to become heroes. It's just that, there's this concept of the center and the margin. The center is society, and what it does is you conform to the center, and in return you get safety, because the center provides safety and regularity. You have power all the time, drinking water, healthcare. What the margin does is it offers you freedom at the expense of safety. And so people have the choice, but they can choose to be part of the center or they can choose to be part of the margin. It is now again, like you don't have a full choice because as you're growing up, you do have to conform to the center of your family, your parents. But as you become an adult, you can say, I'm going to move to the margin. I'm going to be part of the margin because I don't like to conform to the society. And so that there's a trade-off there. And even though if you're in the center or in the margin, you can still go on to the hero's journey. And what I think the point of the hero's journey is that it is a necessary journey to survive or to develop and improve as a human being. Because the fundamental breakdown of the hero's journey is descent into chaos and then rise and return to a new order. And so that can apply on a psychological level, on a personal level with your family, and your career level. There are many levels on which you can apply the hero archetype. And so you can have a very sort of bland career, let's say, but you can have a very sort of multiple iterations of the hero archetype in your sort of romantic life, let's say, or the other way around.
Excellent point, Pegor. Next up is Paul, Joe, and Aaron. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much following on the last point in what I was thinking about in it, the question I had, which is we wouldn't want to constrict Jung to one version of the hero's journey. It's really the same point. And so Steve really isn't being a naysayer. He's saying that this version of the hero's journey isn't mine, but there's a billion other stories. And the real brilliance of the stories that last a long time is these different functions are somehow captured in the story and some path is taken. But it might be the hero leaving and not quote unquote returning to his father's role, but it's still the hero's journey. So do you agree with that? Is that in sync with how you're thinking about this?
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Next up is Joe.
You know, just to think about this a little bit differently is the idea of confronting our shadow, right? And then this idea of becoming. So what happens if Simba doesn't confront his shadow, you know, and he doesn't become the hero, you know? And I think that that's an interesting question to ask, because at some point he would have still had to face those things one way or the other. And I think that he can face them with, you know, courage and triumph, or, you know, if he represses it and doesn't confront his shadow, he'll pay a heavy price. Love and everybody else around him will pay a heavy price as well. So I think that this is also an idea of acceptance in confronting our shadow, and how we engage with our shadow determines the outcomes of our lives.
Thank you, Joe. Claire, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, and it's a good point, because the shadow is also very uniquely individualized as well. So just like, you know, the hero for Simba looked really unique to him and his own experiences and the culture in which he was renewing. Similarly with shadow work, and I think Jung and Peterson would both say this, like, we all have that, our very own sense of hell. And I think, you know, whatever Simba was doing, eating the bugs and having his adolescence, like that was some proclivity that was natural to him. And so, you know, overcoming that shadow and understanding that shadow is knowing what would Simba look like in 10 years if he hadn't gone back, if Nala hadn't showed up. And it's unique to your own special kind of, you know, evilness. So when Peterson sets up the kind of self-authoring program to evaluate both your values and your virtues, you want to think about, you know, everything that are your best values and everything that you know if you leaned into that, it wouldn't go well, and then project that toward the future. So you're consciously always working in life in contrast to these two sort of archetypal forms of yourself.
Okay, next up is Aaron, Jory, and Steve.
Yeah,
Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Steve, and I think Steve, you make a fairly decent point about, like, well, what if that's not my journey? But I think if we see Simba's journey as one of listening to obligation, okay, it may mean that you yourself do not become a king and do the same exact job as that of your father, but you cannot just, play in the jungle and just shirk responsibility. So I think that when we see Simba as having an obligation or having some kind of responsibility, now that responsibility might manifest in a radically different way in your personal life, or it 90, in this day and age, it's probably not going to be following in your father's footsteps and doing the same exact thing that he did. So I just think if we see Simba as rising to the call of action and not kind of just jerking off responsibility or obligation, then it kind of makes more sense.
Good point, Aaron. And I think it kind of goes back to Paul's point that there are infinite variations of hero's journey. And this is like one variation of it with all kinds of particulars. And there are many, many, many particulars here that a person would say, I certainly don't identify with a circle. I don't think circle is the right shape. I think spiral is the right shape for human beings. And it's not, I don't think that for human beings, it is confined to one geographical location. You should consider the entire Earth as your domain. And so it's like, my conceptions of a hero's journey are different, but there are some commonality of patterns. So absolutely. It's going to be Steve, Jory, and Laura next. Steve, go ahead.
Okay, well, to that point, I agree. Just everybody know that the journey doesn't end with the hero's journey. Sometimes that's the beginning of it. The other point I wanted to make was to what Joe was saying. I agree with what he says. I would just ask, maybe substitute a different word rather than confront your shadow. Use accept your shadow, integrate your shadow. That's what Jung is about. That's all part of us. Those evil, negative things are all part of us. We all have it, but we need to accept it, not just reject it and repress it, because then it will come back and get us.
Okay, a good point. Next up is Jory. Jory, go ahead.
So I really liked what Steve said, because what got me interested in Carl Jung was the books by James Hollis, who's a very prolific Jungian analyst and writer. And his key point was that what Jungian depth psychology has to offer is helping people find meaning at midlife and beyond that. And that's when these things such as integrating your anima or animus become relevant. And simply to say, well, Simba also had Nala as a counterpart, I'm not, that is being externalized. Definitely. It's not something you are typically dealing with as a person in late adolescence or early adulthood. So I think there were some liberties taken to put that in there. Although it was creative, but I don't think that it would really apply that much to a younger person. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jory. Laura.
I was just thinking about the role of Nola in all of this, because I remember the film, I think she had a more significant role in his life in terms of helping him through these periods and providing him with ability to make good judgment and so forth. So I don't know.
Excellent.
I think it was, okay. More.
What we're going to do is that we're going to now go ahead and discuss this in the breakout rooms. So Claire, do you want to have any kind of concluding remarks before we go to the breakout rooms?
No, I think I would definitely encourage in these discussions to, the more we can think about our own lives and experiences with any of these archetypes and what resonates and doesn't, I think it'll help ground the conversation a little bit.